Now, before we get started, I'll introduce our speaker. Dr. Elizabeth Lageson is a licensed clinical psychologist and a clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. Dr. Lageson is the founder and director of the UCLA Peers Clinic, which is an outpatient hospital-based program providing parent-assisted social skills training for individuals from preschool to adulthood. Dr. Lageson has trained mental health professionals, educators, and families worldwide and is dedicated to developing and testing evidence-based treatments to support social skills across the lifespan. As one of the only empirically supported and internationally recognized social skills programs for neurodivergent youth, Peers is currently used in over 150 countries and has been translated into over a dozen languages. These webinars are made possible thanks to generous donor support. If you'd like to contribute, visit our website at autism.org. And now I will turn this over to Dr. Lageson.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Denise, and thanks so much to ARI for the warm welcome and the ability to meet with all of you today to talk about a program that's very near and dear to my heart. So before I get started, I wanted to just share these disclosures with all of you. I do receive book royalties from the sales of my books from Taylor and Francis and Wiley and Sons, and I do receive research funding from the National Institutes of Health, from the Administration for Community Living, and also Autism Speaks. So what I was hoping to talk about today with all of you is to begin with talking about some of the common social differences that we often see among neurodivergent youth, including autistic youth, some of the consequences of things like peer rejection, and also the importance of friendships. I also would love to share with you a little bit about some methods for teaching social skills and social strategies. I'll give you a little overview of our peers intervention, including a couple of skills that we teach in our program. And that will include starting conversations, which is one of the ways we meet new people, and also handling teasing. And then I'll wrap things up with a brief overview of some research findings, including a meta-analysis of peers and also a comparison trial that looked at telehealth versus in-person delivery of this program. And then we'll just kind of wind things down with talking about some resources. So when it comes to the social differences among neurodivergent youth, we know that a lot of areas emerge. One difference relates to social communication and conversational skills. Another differences relate to things like social awareness and understanding of kind of the social landscape in which they exist. We also know that many of the young people that we work with will have difficulty with constructive social engagement, which would include things like, going up and starting conversations or entering group conversations. Social cognition is another area where some of our youth will struggle, and that's essentially the technical term for perspective taking, just being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and anticipate how they might think or feel or react in a given situation. And that can sometimes impact relationships when that's a challenge. Bottom line is a lot of the neurodivergent youth that we work with, though, do struggle with establishing and maintaining, close, meaningful friendships with others. They often want these friends and desire these friendships, but will sometimes have difficulty either developing or maintaining those relationships. And unfortunately, sometimes the friendship quality even suffers. Sadly, when it comes to those who struggle with social interactions and relationships, we see two different types of individuals that might present for a program like peers. And those include those who are peer rejected and also those who are socially neglected. So the peer rejected individuals are those who are actively seeking out their peers, but they're actively getting pushed away. And they often experience more teasing and bullying, and they sometimes can even have bad reputations with their peers. But these folks really are seeking out their peers. They're just unfortunately being rejected. Then we have another group of young people that present often for programs like peers, and those are the individuals that are socially neglected. Now, these are the folks that are actively avoiding their peers. They're not even trying to socially engage others. And they may want to have friends, but maybe don't know how to have friends. So they're not even really trying. They're often seen as isolated or withdrawn, and they often go ignored or unnoticed by other people. So, the good news about all of this is even though those types of individuals are quite different, on the surface, the types of skills that we teach related to making and keeping friends will be the same. And that's because in peers, what we're doing is we're teaching skills that we know through research have been shown to work in friendship development. So it's kind of the stuff that people maybe naturally are doing to make and keep friends, maybe haven't thought about exactly what they were doing. And we're trying to create sort of rules and steps around those behaviors that have been effective for friendship development. And so it won't matter if someone's peer rejected or socially neglected, because in the end, the skills will be the same. What will be different, though, is maybe what they struggle with. And that can often be very individualized to that person. So sadly, there's a lot of, negative consequences of things like peer rejection during adolescence and even into adulthood. And we know that, some of those consequences include greater mental health problems. In fact, peer rejection is one of the strongest predictors of mental health problems like anxiety and depression. So what that tells us, if you want to guess, or predict who's going to be depressed or anxious later in life, go into a typical middle school or high school and look for the kids who are being rejected. And that will be one of the strongest predictors. And, I would argue that we could do more for those kids. It's not just neurodivergent kids that are struggling socially. It's not just autistic kids. It's like a lot of kids. And I'll share some of the data on, really how pervasive this problem is in just a moment. But in terms of other, consequences of this type of peer rejection, we also know that this is very strongly related with loneliness and feelings of low self-esteem, even substance abuse, strongly predicted by peer rejection, poor academic performance, and even early withdrawal from school is related to peer rejection. And at its worst, suicidal ideation and suicide attempts are strongly predicted by peer rejection. So, we definitely know this is a significant issue for a lot of young people with some pretty dire consequences. But as I mentioned a moment ago, it's not just neurodivergent or autistic youth that are struggling socially. And in fact, in the peers program, we don't just work with autistic youth or those who are neurodivergent. We really work with anybody who's struggling socially that wants to learn the skills that we're teaching. And so what you'll see in this pie chart here is what's called peer sociometric data. And this data is in aggregate. It's compiled from a number of studies across North America. And in these types of research studies, what they'll do is they'll go into a typical middle school or high school, and they'll ask kids to identify who they're friends with, who they like, maybe who they don't like. And they get these different categories of peer acceptance. And about half of kids, about 55% of kids, are in the average range of peer acceptance. They're doing okay socially. Then you have about another 15 to 17% of kids who are considered popular. And popular doesn't necessarily mean well liked, it means well known. So you can also get some pretty controversial kids in that category, like the bullies or the gossips. Now, on top of all of this, we also have about 15% of kids who are peer rejected. These are the kids who are actively seeking out their peers, but they're actively getting pushed away. And then on top of that, you have another 15% of kids who are socially neglected. These are the kids who aren't even trying to socially engage their peers. And what this data tells us is that in any typical middle school or high school, at least in North America, about 1/3 of kids are struggling socially. And again, it's not just the neurodivergent kids. There's a lot of kids struggling socially. And this is really, important to be thinking about too, because in developing programs to target that sort of, relationship building, it's also important to think about why friendships are so important. And we've known for decades that just simply having one or two close friends is very predictive of later adjustment in life and actually can buffer the impact of stressful life events. Think about COVID-19, for example, and that global pandemic we all lived through. And imagine going through that pandemic and all that social distancing and isolating and not having any friends. And what would that feel like? We know that those stressful life events can be very much buffered by having those close friends. We also know that just having one or two close friends is correlated positively with things like self-esteem and independence. You feel better about yourself if you have a couple of close friends, and you're more likely to live independently if you just simply have a couple of close friends. And finally, we also know that just having one or two close friends is negatively correlated with things like depression and anxiety, right? You're less likely to feel depressed or anxious if you just have a couple of close friends. So in many ways, working on social relationships and social skills is sort of another approach to teaching and supporting individuals around better mental health. And so also very important to be thinking about that connection between friendships, social skills, and mental health. So this really is what led me to develop the Peers program back in 2004 at UCLA. Initially, the program was developed for autistic youth in middle school and high school as a parent-assisted program. But that program grew very quickly over time and has now grown into school-based curricula. We have a young adult program. We even have research programs underway right now investigating peers for careers, which is a college to career transition program, also peers for dating. And we even have Peers for Preschoolers manual, which is soon to be released in January of 2025. So really, even though the program goes back to adolescents and its parent-assisted model, it really has expanded quite a bit because a lot of these skills really are applicable to many different groups of individuals. At this point in time, Peers is used in over 150 countries and has been translated into over a dozen languages through different cross-cultural validation trials. And we have over 75 scientific papers that have established the efficacy, the benefit of peers with different populations of individuals. We don't just work with, again, autistic youth. We have a lot of research to show that this program is effective with many different young people. What makes Peers unique from other programs is that it's really one of the only evidence-based social skills programs out there. Lots of research to show that it actually works. We also have a very strong social coaching aspect to our program. So that's often, parent or caregiver assisted. It could be a school-based professional that's acting as a social coach. It could also be a peer coach. It could be a life coach, a job coach, a dating coach. There's lots of people that are involved in this program. But the idea is that we're training others to act as social coaches out in the real world so that we can sort of sustain the program over time and generalize it to other settings. This program is very important to point out. It's really only appropriate for socially motivated, teens and adults, people that want to learn the skills that we're teaching. We wouldn't want to force this program onto someone who doesn't want to learn some of the strategies that we have to offer. So it's one of the first things we screen for in any of our programs. We're also only teaching ecologically valid social skills. This is another unique aspect of peers. And what that means is that we're not teaching what we think young people should do in social situations. We're actually teaching what we know works through research. So we're looking at what has been effective for people in reaching certain social goals and then trying to teach those strategies. Finally, another unique aspect of peers is that it's cross-culturally validated and adapted across the globe and in numerous countries. And so we don't just translate the manuals into different languages, but we culturally adapt them and we test them through rigorous clinical trials. In terms of what we're teaching in peers, we basically, across our adolescent and young adult programs specifically, we focus a lot on things like friendship skills and romantic relationship skills. So that could include things like finding and choosing, appropriate friends or romantic partners, conversational skills, including starting, entering, and exiting conversations. Of course, electronic communication and social media, also very important. Appropriate use of humor, good sportsmanship, and having get-togethers with friends, and even strategies related to dating etiquette in our young adult program. And that typically includes things like letting someone know that you like them, asking someone on a date and kind of going on dates, and just general dating do's and don'ts. But also in these programs for our adolescents and young adults, we also have strategies for managing conflict and rejection. So in dating etiquette in our young adult program, that might include things like, taking no for an answer or politely turning someone down for a date, and even handling unwanted dating pressure from a partner. In both of our programs, though, for teens and adults, we also have strategies for handling arguments and disagreements, as well as things like handling different forms of bullying. With regard to sort of more direct forms of bullying, we have strategies for handling teasing and embarrassing feedback, as well as physical bullying. And then related to more indirect forms of bullying, we have strategies for handling cyberbullying and rumors and gossip. And then in our adolescent program, we also have strategies for changing a reputation if that's a concern for the young person. What's really important, though, to highlight about this program, because a lot of times when you talk about social skills programming and social skills supports, there's a lot of questions that come up about things like masking and camouflaging, and how does that all work in this type of setting? And the thing is that you really have to highlight the importance of choice. And also really embracing neurodiversity in this process. This needs to be a neuro-affirming approach. People shouldn't feel like they're not themselves when they're using these strategies, and it should be a choice. And it's a choice not only to join a program like Peers, but also a choice whether or not you choose to use the skills that you're taught in these types of programs. So really learning and even using social skills should definitely be voluntary. People should be intrinsically motivated to learn the skills. And we always have to be considering the role of neurodiversity in different ways of thinking as we're talking about social interactions. I think that learning the skills taught in Peers should never be about changing the person. That's not what this is about. It really should be about using skills and enhancing social interactions so that other people can appreciate us for who we already are. But just as I would argue that it's not ethical to force, social skills on to people that don't want to learn these types of strategies, it's also not ethical to deny people the opportunity to learn these strategies if they want to understand them. So that's sort of important caveat in thinking about all of this and the role of neurodiversity and trying to be neuro-affirming in these types of programs. All right, so I wanted to give you a little snapshot of some of the skills that we teach in Peers. And one of my favorite skills that we teach in Peers relates to something that we call peer entry. So peer entry is the technical term for just engaging other people, going up and starting conversations or entering group conversations. And unfortunately, a lot of young people don't always get the best advice when it comes to this type of social interaction. And so I ask a lot of young people, what they're told to do to meet new people. Like imagine it's the first day of school or it's your first day at a new job. What are people often told to do to meet their peers? And I'm told that they're often told to go up and say hi or go up and introduce themselves. And, I hear that over and over. I've been hearing that for decades. And I don't know if you've ever really thought about what that would look like. You've probably heard that too. Maybe we've even told people to do that. But what would that look like? So imagine I just walk up to a random person, in my science class and say, "Hi, I'm Liz." Or even worse, I go up and I interrupt a conversation and say, "Hi, I'm Liz." What are people going to think of me? Well, they're going to think that's kind of strange. It's kind of a little random, if someone's introducing me, that's one thing, but just to walk up and say, "Hi, I'm Liz," isn't really how people meet typically. And so instead, we want to look at the research and figure out, well, what do people do to start conversations with strangers or people they don't know that well? What do people do to enter group conversations? And we can investigate that, create some rules, and then teach some more ecologically valid strategies, right? Well, there's a formula for how we do this. And I mentioned I was going to share this sort of formula, the methods for how we teach these skills. And one of the methods that we use is role-playing demonstrations. And we want to show role-playing demonstrations of both socially sort of helpful strategies for, in this case, meeting new people, but we also want to show social strategies that maybe won't be so helpful, might even be a little socially risky. And we usually start with those strategies first to talk about kind of what could be some of the issues with doing these things. Because in some cases, these might be the behaviors that the young people that we're working with are engaging in. And they might even be the behaviors that are resulting in them being rejected by other people. So we have to address those as well. So we'd start with this first role play. And in this role play, you're going to see a young person by the name of Alina, and she's going to be trying to start this conversation with someone she doesn't really know. And I just want you to watch this and think about what Alina is doing here that may be a little socially risky.
Hey, do you ever go roller skating? What? Do you go roller skating? No. Why not? You should go. Okay. It's really fun. I go like every weekend. Sweet. There's this new skate park that just opened up. I'm trying to watch something right now, so. Oh, well, I'm just saying, it's really fun. They have like a student night every Thursday. Cool. You should definitely go. Okay.
All right, so we would time out that role play and we would ask, what did Alina do that was a little socially risky? And that's the language that we like to use. The language has kind of changed a lot over the years with presenting these role plays, but that's how we talk about it now. It's kind of socially risky. And so the young people in our groups will often say, well, she just walked up to this person and she just randomly started talking about roller skating. There was no context. And we'd say, that's right. So then we would do a little perspective taking. So this is the next part of the formula. We've demonstrated a role play. We've asked what was socially risky. We're using a very Socratic method too. This is also part of our formula. So the Socratic method is where we're not telling young people what to think or what to, believe. We're not telling them what to do. We're kind of working collaboratively here to think about what could be the issue with maybe this kind of socially risky behavior. And also we use that same Socratic method in generating some steps that we might follow that might be less socially risky, maybe even socially helpful. So next is the social cognition piece. Now we have to get into the mind of the other person, do that perspective taking. And so we'll ask questions like, well, what was that like for the other person when Alina just walked up and started talking about roller skating randomly? And so they'll say things like, well, it was kind of annoying, right? She was trying to watch something on her phone and maybe it was a little confusing. And what did she think of Alina? And a lot of our young people will say that she thought maybe she was, like a little clueless, like she didn't get that, she didn't want to talk to her, or maybe she was a little annoying. And would she want to talk to Alina again? Probably not. We're not off to a great start anyway. So we do that perspective taking, getting into the mind of the other person. And now we want to get into what are the ecologically valid social, steps for starting conversations. What does research tell us people do that's effective, in talking to people and leading to some kind of peer acceptance in conversations? Well, the first thing that a lot of people will do when they're trying to start a conversation with someone they either don't know at all or maybe know kind of so-so is they start by kind of casually looking over at the person, right? But you don't want to be staring at the person because that would be maybe a little creepy, right? So instead, people will use a prop to look distracted, like they might be kind of looking at their phone or maybe looking at some reading material, but they look a little distracted and they're kind of casually noticing this person. And then because what we know from friendship research is that friendships are really kind of often based on common interests, what we're going to do is we're going to try to find a common interest. Now, in that video that we just saw, the other person that Alina was trying to talk to, her name is Jordan. And Jordan was on her iPhone and she was watching a music video. So what could be some possible common interests? Okay, well, it could be the music video that she's watching, like maybe the artist that she's listening to. Maybe it's the iPhone that she's watching the music video on. Maybe it's even the app that she's using to watch the music video. It could be the setting that they're in, the library. And there's options here of possible common interests. And once we find that common interest, then we're going to mention the common interest. And you can do that in one of three ways. You can either make a comment, you could ask a question, or you could give a compliment. So in that case, what would be a comment? She might say something like, oh, that's the new such and such video. Or she could ask a question. Oh, is that the new such and such video? Or she could give a compliment. Oh, I love that song. Right? So these are ways that we're mentioning this common interest. And then we have to do this thing called trading information. And in peers, the term trading information really represents a lot of sophisticated sort of rules of conversational skills. They involve things, like not hogging the conversation or not asking too many questions. Ultimately, the goal, though, of trading information is always to be finding common interests. And so after they've been doing that for a little while, we also want to make sure that we're assessing whether or not the other person wants to talk to us. And a lot of times when you ask people, how can you tell if someone wants to talk to you? They'll say, oh, it's like a feeling that you get. Well, for some people, they might get the feeling, but a lot of the young people that we work with don't get that feeling. However, if you do get that feeling, it's probably because you're picking up on concrete behaviors that are giving you the feeling, right? So what would someone be doing with their eyes if they want to talk to you? They would be looking at you, right? And not rolling their eyes or making a face. What would they be doing with their body if they wanted to talk to you? They would be facing you, right? Not turned away, kind of giving you the cold shoulder. And they would actually be talking to you. Not giving rude replies or short remarks. And these are the three behavioral signs that tell us if someone wants to talk to us. And then if things are going well and it seems like they wanted to talk to us and we've never met them before, then we can introduce ourselves. But if there are going to be introductions, they come later. And how would we introduce ourselves? You might say something like, I don't think we've met before. I'm Liz. Or, by the way, I'm Liz. Something like that, that's sort of letting them know who you are. But again, that would come later in the conversation. So if we're following the method, the formula for teaching these types of skills, the next part of the formula is to show the example in the role play of how to follow these steps. And so we would introduce this by saying, watch this role play and think about which steps Alina's following for starting this conversation.
Oh my God, I love that song.
Yeah, me too. This is the new video that just came out today.
No way, I'm dying to see that.
Yeah, it's so good.
That's awesome. Have you ever seen her in concert?
I have. I actually have tickets for her upcoming concert.
No way, the one that's coming up in 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's gonna be so great.
That's so cool.
Have you ever seen her perform?
No, I wish. I really want to.
Oh my gosh, she's amazing in concert. You need to see her.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. By the way, I'm Alina.
I'm Jordan.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, so then we time out the role play. We ask which steps Alina followed for starting that conversation. And then we would do a little perspective taking, right? So what was that like for Jordan this time? It was probably nice, enjoyable, right? And what did she think of Alina this time? Well, she thought she was nice and friendly. And would she want to talk to her again? Probably. Right? This is how we meet new people, right? It's not going up and saying hi and introducing ourselves. It's like people follow these kind of steps. And so then, of course, the next part of the formula for teaching these skills is to practice this. So we'd have our young adults or our teens practice starting conversations in the context of our group. And then we would give homework assignments to practice outside of the group. And that's hopefully with some kind of parent or caregiver support as a social coach. And of course, this is how we're going to generalize the skills out into the real world. So that gives you a little snapshot of some of the skills we teach related to making and keeping friends. But I also mentioned that we teach strategies related to handling conflict and rejection. And so one of the more common, strategies that a lot of our young people need to use relates to handling teasing. Teasing is a very common form of bullying, but this is another example where really well-intentioned adults will sometimes give young people not the best advice about how to handle teasing. So when I ask most young people what they're told to do in response to teasing, most will say that they're told to either ignore, the person, walk away, or tell an adult. And then I ask them if it works. And what do you think they say? I say it doesn't work that well. And the reason is that actually none of those strategies are technically ecologically valid. Think about it. If someone's teasing me and I ignore them, what will they do? Well, they'll keep teasing me, right? And, I made it really easy for them. I made myself even kind of look sort of weak because I didn't do anything. Am I more likely or less likely to be teased by that person? Probably more likely because I didn't do anything about it. Okay, now if I walk away, what will they do? Probably follow me, keep teasing me. And again, I sort of look weak because I didn't do anything. So I'm going to be more likely to be teased in the future. And then if I go tell someone, now they want to retaliate against me because I tried to get them into trouble. So, those strategies aren't usually the best strategies. They are options. Of course, we have choices here. We can choose what we want to do, but we also want to give them some strategies that we know are ecologically valid, that we know other young people are using that are helping them to stop people from teasing them. And so really, this is probably one of the simplest strategies that we teach in peers. We teach them to use these teasing comebacks. And what that means is that we're going to act like what the other person said didn't bother us. And we're going to do that by providing a short comeback that shows that what the person said was, kind of stupid. And so people will say things like, whatever, or anyway, or so what, big deal, and who cares? And your point is, am I supposed to care? Is that supposed to be funny? Anyway. And they'll sometimes say things like, tell me when you get to the funny part, or tell me when you get to the punchline. People will roll their eyes and they'll shrug their shoulders, and they give the impression that it didn't bother them. And that makes the teasing not fun for the person who's teasing us. Because you also have to get into the mind of the teaser. What do they want us to do? Well, they want us to react. They want us to get mad or sad or, tease back. They want to get a reaction. So if you're not giving them the reaction they're looking for, that's not going to be fun for them. And in fact, it will probably embarrass them a little bit. And then after you've given a couple or a few of these comebacks, then you can walk away. Then you can remove yourself. If you can't walk away, maybe you turn away. So we don't show the sort of socially risky role play in this case, because the socially risky role play would be to get mad, to get upset, to kind of try to tease back. And that could actually be very emotionally triggering for some of our young people to see that. So we just show sort of the socially helpful strategy of using these comebacks. And so this is going to be Gabe handling teasing. And I would introduce this by saying, watch to see what Gabe is doing correctly here to use those teasing comebacks. For some reason, it's not playing. So what I will promise you is that I will show you this video at the very end of my talk. No idea why it's not playing right now. And it's so good too. I will tell you what it's going to look like though. So Gabe is going to be standing kind of in that library situation with a book in his hand. And he's going to have this other young person walk up to him and call him like a dweeb. And he's going to say whatever to the guy. And he's like, well, what are you reading again? You're always reading. And I think Gabe says something like, am I supposed to care? And the guy says, well, yeah, you're always reading. And then Gabe says, anyway, and he just sort of walks away, and it's brilliant. So this is like a tease for you, like to stay till the end of the talk, and then you can see the video again. And I promise Denise will keep me honest, and I'll show you the video. I'll pull it from my files. But meanwhile, what I want to do is I want to share with you some of other research outcomes with peers. And so there's lots of articles that show that peers has been effective with multiple groups of individuals, including not just those on the autism spectrum, but also those with ADHD, depression, anxiety, intellectual disabilities, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, and also psychosis. Those are just the ones that are coming to mind. And clinically, the program is really just used with anybody who wants to learn the skills. But in this meta-analysis that I'm going to share with you, this was specifically for autistic adolescents in a parent-assisted Peers for Adolescents program. And so I'm going to share with you two studies kind of simultaneously. One is the meta-analysis, where it's a number of studies they're looking at in aggregate. This study was conducted by some colleagues at UC San Francisco that are unaffiliated with the UCLA program. And then I'm also going to show you some findings from a randomized control trial using the same program out of some research at UCLA. Just to give you some sense of like what to expect from the program. So to kind of clarify how the meta-analysis process works. And so in this study, they looked at a dozen studies of the Peers for Adolescents program with autistic adolescents, and they looked at effect sizes. Now, effect sizes tell you how meaningful the relationship is between variables. And a large effect size would be 0.8 or higher. And that tells you that the research findings have some kind of practical significance. A medium effect size is around 0.5, and a small effect size is 0.2 or less. And that indicates that there's limited practical application to those findings. So in this study that I'm also going to be sharing with you kind of simultaneously, this was a randomized control trial out of UCLA with our parent-assisted adolescent program for autistic youth. And the average age of these participants was about 14, primarily male, somewhat ethnically diverse, but primarily Caucasian. And then all of these kids had average or above average intellectual abilities, but really significantly delayed adaptive functioning. And so the first set of core skills that they looked at in the meta-analysis was social skills knowledge. Were these young people learning the skills that were being taught in the peers curriculum? And this is where they saw across all of these different studies what are called large effect sizes, right? So there's definitely some practical significance. This is pretty meaningful across all of the studies. And this graph over here, the bar graph on the right, just shows you kind of the difference between those who went through peers and those who went through a control condition. This is going to be the change in scores from pre to post test in the area of social skills knowledge. All right, they also in the meta-analysis looked at overall social skills on a measure called the Social Skills Improvement System. It's a measure by Gresham and Elliott, and it uses standard scores that look at overall social skills. And here we see medium to large effect sizes across the various studies that used that measure. And on the right there, you can look at that bar graph. You're seeing about an 11-point standard score improvement in those who went through the peers condition versus those who were just sort of waiting for treatment. That's almost a full standard deviation change. So again, that's not just statistically significant, but it's clinically meaningful. In the meta-analysis, they also looked at social responsiveness. So this is using the measure, the social responsiveness scale by John Constantino. And this measure uses what are called T-scores that have a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 10. And here we're seeing medium to large effect sizes across the studies. And if you look at that randomized control trial out of UCLA, we're seeing about an 11-point T-score improvement from pre to post test in the peers condition. That's more than a full standard deviation change just from pre to post test. Finally, in this meta-analysis, they also looked at social engagement, according to both teen and parent report. And they were looking at, with social engagement, the frequency of get-togethers in the previous month. And this is where we have a little bit more variability across the studies in the meta-analysis. Here they saw anywhere from small to large effect sizes, so a lot of variability. But what's interesting here is knowing a lot about these studies is that the studies where they found smaller effect sizes were in countries where having get-togethers with friends in the community or in your home is less common, right? So places like the Shum paper here is out of Hong Kong, and the Rabin paper is Israel, and the U paper is out of South Korea. And these are all areas where get-togethers with friends, outside of school and extracurriculars are just not as common. So it sort of makes sense that they're not going to have these large effect sizes because culturally it's not as relevant. But we know that at least in North America, get-togethers with friends are pretty common. And so you'll see in the study on the right here that the change in the frequency of get-togethers in the previous month changes pretty dramatically in the peers condition. On average, they're having about 4.5 additional get-togethers in the previous month by the end of the program. And I should mention that this would not be with other group members. This would be with people unaffiliated with the peers program. The second study and final study I wanted to share with you in this talk today relates to comparing in-person versus telehealth delivery of this program. That we know that during COVID-19, a lot of programs had to move online if they wanted to continue. And there's been a lot of research now that shows that telehealth delivery can be very effective in mental health settings. And so the question here was, how effective is telehealth delivery of a social skills program? And so in this study, we were looking at in-person versus telehealth delivery of the Peers for Adolescents program. So again, this is a parent-assisted program for teens in middle school and high school. The differences in the group structure were pretty minimal. So they're pretty similar in general. Both were 16-week programs, 90-minute sessions. The only difference, of course, was that telehealth was conducted over Zoom. The content was the same, although we did include some additional modified steps for online social skills during COVID. A lot of kids, for example, were having get-togethers online with their friends rather than in person. So we had to teach skills related to that. For in-person groups, up until that point, we were just doing in-person role plays and behavioral rehearsals. When we moved to telehealth, we started using those video role plays, like the ones that you just saw with Alina. We also did our behavioral rehearsals, of course, in person for the in-person groups, but over telehealth, we did those behavioral rehearsals where they were practicing newly learned skills in virtual breakout rooms. And then for homework assignments, they had the same assignments across the two groups. The only difference was that in the telehealth groups, we also added a new assignment to have what we called an in-group get-together, which is where we assigned group members to socialize and have sort of an online get-together during the week to practice some of the skills that they might not be able to use otherwise. All right, so this is what we first looked at. We wanted to first look at just telehealth efficacy. Was it working? And so this is just looking at telehealth alone, pre to post test. The left there in the light blue is the pre-test, the dark blue is the post-test, and this is the change in scores. And this is the social responsiveness scale, which is technically sort of an autism screening tool, or sometimes considered to be an autism screening tool. So, we're looking for the scores to go down to represent improved social responsiveness. And here we see almost a full standard deviation change from pre to post test in social responsiveness in our telehealth groups. We also found a nice improvement in social skills knowledge. They were definitely learning the skills we were teaching in the telehealth groups. And this is a nice comparison of pre to post test on a measure called the Test of Adolescent Social Skills Knowledge. We also looked at overall social skills on the social skills improvement system. Remember, this is that measure that uses standard scores with a mean of 100, a standard deviation of 15. And here we see that our participants started in kind of the below average range of social skills on that measure, and they ended the program in more the average range. And it was about a 10-point standard score improvement. On that same measure, the social skills improvement system, we also saw nice decreases in problem behaviors from pre to post test in the telehealth group. And also, finally, we saw nice improvements in the number of get-togethers in the previous month. So this is social engagement. And on average, teens here are reporting having about a little bit more than 5 get-togethers, additional get-togethers in the previous month by the end of the program. And parents are also reporting similar outcomes. So then, of course, the next question we have is, well, how do these outcomes with telehealth compare to in-person delivery? And so the blue line here represents the telehealth groups. The yellow line represents in-person groups. And this is, again, the change in scores from pre to post test. And this is the social responsiveness scale. Again, you want the scores to go down to represent improvements in social responsiveness. And both groups are equivalent, essentially, across in-person and telehealth. Same thing is true for social skills knowledge. Both groups improving at the same rates. They're learning at equal rates, no significant differences in those outcomes across telehealth and in person. Same is true for overall social skills on the social skills improvement system. Both groups are improving equivalently, no significant differences there. And same is true on that same measure in terms of decreased problem behaviors. Now, this next couple slides show the change in the frequency of get-togethers in the previous month. And while it visually looks like the telehealth groups are outperforming the in-person groups, those differences are not statistically significant. And actually, they can be accounted for the fact that in the telehealth groups, we also had that additional homework assignment to have an in-group get-together. So that would be counted in this total number of get-togethers. So really, these groups are equivalent across social engagement, both according to teen report, and this is also parent report. So no significant differences there. And so really what this study told us was that telehealth delivery was essentially equivalent to in-person delivery in terms of the outcomes in the group. And of course, telehealth's not for everybody. Not everybody's going to want to do that. But it certainly did open up access to our program where people who might not normally have been able to access our program because of geography, for example, were able to access it remotely. All right, so as I wrap up our discussion here, I just want to share with you some of the new directions that we're taking with the Peers program. And so we have 2 large randomized control trials recruiting right now. One of them is for a study for Peers for Careers. This is a 20-week college to career transition program. Right now, it's specifically for autistic adults, but in our next clinical trial, we'll be opening it up to others not on the spectrum. And it is a peer-mediated program where there's peers are acting as career coaches to our autistic job seekers. We completed a large clinical trial. It was a randomized control trial during the COVID-19 pandemic with over 100 autistic participants, where we compared those who had career coaches to those who did not. And not surprisingly, we found that those who had career coaches did better in the program. But now what we're doing to advance this work is to create more employer supports. And so we've done a lot in Peers on helping in this case, the autistic job seeker in refining their social interactions, whether it be in interviewing skills or workplace skills, to kind of help to acclimate to the workforce. But what we really need to do next is to make the workforce and the employment environment more accommodating and more inclusive for neurodivergent talent. And so that's what we're doing in this next study is we're actually comparing those who receive employer supports to those who don't receive employer supports. Everyone receives the Peers for Careers intervention, and we're hoping to establish the importance of creating more inclusive, neuro-inclusive work environments. So more to come on that. We also are doing a research study now on Peers for Dating. This is a 16-week program that teaches dating skills to autistic adults that are interested in developing and maintaining romantic relationships. In this study, we also use that peer-mediated kind of dating coaching, right? So there's peers that act as dating coaches to these young adults. And in the first clinical trial where we had 75 autistic adults who went through the program, we compared those who had coaches to those who did not have coaches. Again, that was during the COVID-19 pandemic. But now in this second randomized control trial, we're comparing our telehealth delivery of this program to our in-person delivery, and then also to a third group of those who are not receiving the intervention at all. So more to come on that, but we're very excited about that. And please feel free to reach out if you do want more information about those clinical trials. Also should mention that we, even though we do a lot of research at the UCLA Peers Clinic, we also provide a lot of clinical services too. We see hundreds of families every year in our hospital-based program. We run at least 2 groups every week for Peers for Young Adults. This is a 16-week program with 90-minute weekly lessons, and this is a caregiver-assisted program where we have both in-person and telehealth options available. We have our Peers for Adolescents program. We typically run anywhere from 2 to 4 groups per week with this program. It's a 16-week program, 90-minute weekly sessions. It's parent-assisted. And again, we have in-person and telehealth options. We also have educational groups that are open to families worldwide that all occur over Zoom. There's a 16-week program for teens, a 16-week program for young adults, both focusing on friendship skills. And we also have an optional 5-week dating course available for both adolescents, and we also have a young adult group as well. Again, all of those offered over Zoom. We also have Peers for Preschoolers. This is a 16-week program for kids 4 to 6 years of age who are interested in learning to make and keep friends. And it's, of course, parent assisted, as our programs tend to be. They're 90-minute weekly groups. And we also have in-person groups for both children and their parents, but we also have an optional telehealth group for parents only. Finally, we also have Peers boot camps at UCLA. These are 2-day intensive topical boot camps that focus on things like conversational skills, friendships, dating, and also handling bullying. And they occur on a Saturday and a Sunday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And there's this intensive instruction around these different skills with lots of practice. In terms of some final resources that might be helpful to you, we do have a virtual boot camp that's available on a YouTube channel that never expires. It has 35 pre-recorded episodes that teaches all of the skills that we teach in our adolescent and our young adult program. And this allows families to kind of go at their own pace and go back and watch the different strategies and skills at various times. If you haven't seen the show Love on the Spectrum and you're interested in some of our boot camps, the very first season of the Love on the Spectrum show out of Australia features a dating boot camp that I conducted with the cast from Love on the Spectrum in Sydney, Australia. And so if you want to see more about those boot camps and learn more about some of the dating content that we teach, you can check that out. Either way, it's a very sweet show. It's very popular. It's in the US as well. And I think it's in its 3rd season now, maybe. And they've won a number of Emmys, and it's very well respected and I think very well done, and definitely should check it out if you haven't seen it. Another useful resource is our role play videos. We have a library of over 100 role play videos on the UCLA Peers Clinic website. They're free to use, open to the public, and we encourage you all to take a look and check those out. We also have a free Peers app. And so this is an app that's available for iOS and Android devices. And it basically teaches all the skills we teach in our teen and young adult programs. And people kind of go through the different levels, almost like a video game. There's role play videos included. There's little quizzes at the end of each level, and even homework assignments suggested to practice the skills off the app. I also have a book called The Science of Making Friends. It's written for families that maybe can't access a peers program, but want to learn more about the skills that we teach related to making and keeping friends. Of course, we also have treatment manuals for professionals that anyone is able to access, on Amazon or wherever books are sold. We do certified trainings frequently throughout the year, usually 1 a month. And we do 7 online teleconferences at UCLA each year related to our various publicly available programs. So for our teen parent-assisted adolescent program, for our school-based program, our young adult program, and soon to be our Peers for Preschoolers program. This will be the very first certified training seminar that we've conducted on Peers for Preschoolers. It's going to be in January of 2025, shortly after the manual comes out. And these are 3-day training seminars that allow professionals to become certified in the program as peers certified providers. Okay, so with that, I want to thank you so much for your attention. I want to thank again Denise for welcoming me to your community and giving me the opportunity to share more about peers with all of you. This is our contact information if you want more information about peers. But before we get involved in going with our Q&A, I would love to take an opportunity to share with you that role play video that I was not able to share on my slides. That pesky little role play wouldn't play for some reason. And so if you would just indulge me for a moment, I promised it was like the little carrot that I was dangling for you to stick around for the Q&A, but I'm going to go ahead and share with you that video now that you missed. And so you might recall that video was related to teasing. And in that video, we saw Gabe, who was, we were about to see Gabe, who was going to be experiencing some teasing from a peer. And we only showed the appropriate example there because we don't want to create any kind of, PTSD flashbacks or anything like that, right? We want to make sure that whatever content we're sharing is not too emotionally charged for our young adults or our adolescents. And so we're just going to show sort of using those teasing comebacks. And so I've now reintegrated that video into the slide, and we're going to watch this role play and think about what Gabe is doing here to handle teasing.
Hey dweeb, reading again?
Whatever.
You're such a loser. You're always reading.
Am I supposed to care?
Yeah, because everyone thinks you're a loser.
Anyway,
All right. And then if we're following the formula that we use for, learning these skills, we would talk about what Gabe did that was, sort of appropriate in using those comebacks, and do a little perspective taking too. What was that like for the person who was teasing him? Not very gratifying, right? Not what he was expecting. And what did he think of Gabe? Wasn't really bothered. And would he want to tease him again? I mean, probably not. It's not very fun to tease him. It's sort of, like a letdown, because he was expecting a different kind of reaction. So thank you for letting me take that opportunity to share that video. I would have been so bummed if I couldn't do that. But for the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen so you do have our contact information. And I'm going to toss it back to Denise, who's going to moderate our Q&A.
All right, so we've just got a little bit of time left, and I will read some of these questions. We had a lot of questions, as you can imagine, but there were some similar themes among the questions. So the first one I'll ask is about, a lot of people are here from overseas. They're wondering about how to find out on your website where they can get peers and what languages it's available in. So is that easily available on the website?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go ahead and go to our website, which you can see at the bottom of the screen here, or just even Googling UCLA Peers Clinic, there's a resources tab that has a registry of all of our peers certified providers. So you can find a provider in your area by country. And then also on that resources tab, there's also the non-English peers manuals. And so you can access them from that site as well. So thanks for that.
Yes, I'm sure you get this question a lot. Since this particular program really is targeted toward individuals who are motivated, who are able to have intrinsic motivation, what's a step before that you've heard for people who aren't there yet, who just aren't quite ready to be socially engaged, but who are being socially neglected? Do you have any suggestions for people who are trying to move their loved ones toward it?
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of times it's in that case, parents that are reaching out to us that are looking for tips and suggestions about how to help their kid. And, that's one of the reasons I wrote The Science of Making Friends. And I have all of these, resources online for the families that maybe can't go to a traditional peers program, but the parents still want to learn the skills to support their kids, because the reality is every parent is acting as a social coach to their kid, whether they realize it or not. You're always giving advice about things to do, and you want to make sure that whatever advice you're giving is, ecologically valid, that it really works in reality. That example of, meeting new people, you don't want to tell your kid, oh, just go up and say hi, go up and introduce yourself. You might say that in a with well intentions, not realizing that that's actually not what people do. So getting a bit more information for parents, I think, is a helpful first step. And then also thinking about, well, what would be socially motivating for their kid to become a little bit more socially engaged? And honestly, for most kids, it's things like extracurricular activities and social activities. So getting them enrolled in activities that they would enjoy, not putting them in, soccer camp if they don't like soccer, but if they're really into art, then maybe an art camp or an art class or an art meetup. If they're really into anime, joining an anime club. If they're really into video games, a gaming club. Finding something that they enjoy that would be intrinsically motivating for them to go to is going to make socialization more rewarding. But then when they get there, now we have to help them to know how to engage with other people. And so if they're not ready to go through sort of a traditional peers program, the parent could still provide some of that coaching behind the scenes if they have the right information.
So maybe doing some video modeling or watching the peers videos that are on the website already,
Yeah.
viewing those things and learning from those ahead of time, even if they're not quite ready for the next step. Okay.
Yeah, even using the app, for example, that was sort of meant to be kind of a standalone sort of resource. It's free to use. Anyone can use it. That might be a nice first step as well.
Okay, and so you talked a little, it sounds like you've got a preschool curriculum that you're starting, and you've got peers for elementary age at this point, and for teens and young adults. Any talk about doing it for older adults now that there's more later diagnosis? We've had some participants today who are asking about that. If, it's never too late to pick up some of those skills or learn more about it.
Yeah. So just to clarify too, I mean, we have our Peers for Preschoolers program and we have our adolescents and our young adult program. The school-based program is actually for adolescents as well, but it is used often for younger kids. So even though it wasn't initially developed for school-aged kids, it often is modified and used with that population. But yeah, a really common question I hear is, what about the older adults? And especially as people are kind of aging into, older adulthood, there's not a lot of resources, unfortunately. So what we've typically done there is we don't get a lot of requests yet from older adults. And so we'll often see them individually. And I haven't done any research on this. So this is just going to be kind of anecdotally, my observation is that a lot of these skills still very much apply to older adults. The peers curriculum can still be taught individually. You don't have to be in a group. It's just helpful to be in a group because you could be practicing with the other group members and working collaboratively using that Socratic method, but you can also do that in individual work as well. So that's what we've done primarily with our older adults. And we've found anecdotally that they seem to be benefiting from the program. We've also collected research data on those participants. We haven't published that data, but we always collect like pre and post comparisons, even in our clinical groups, just to make sure that what we're doing is working. And we haven't found that those outcomes for those older adults are really very different, again, anecdotally, than what we see with younger adults. So I do think the program's applicable. And it's just an area that we really need to explore and try to do more in terms of providing resources to our aging population.
And so this is maybe more of an observation really than a question you can necessarily answer, but just this person saying, I hope we can encourage society and schools to be more proactive in ending bullying. This unnecessary social phenomenon has led to such a loss of human potential. Why do people bully? Those of us who are victims often develop such a level of self-loathing and withdrawal that we fail to take full advantage of skills and talents that we have. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so frustrating, especially knowing that we have some tools that young people can use to combat and minimize some of this bullying that's happening, and knowing the negative mental health outcomes that come from bullying and rejection. I mean, we need to be doing more. And so, I've spent the last 20 years of my career, really trying to help people make and keep friends and to help me, especially neurodivergent youth, be more included, in relationships and in peer groups. And I hope to spend the next 20 years, of my career, if I'm lucky, making the social world more inclusive of those who are neurodivergent. And one of the areas that, I plan to do this and really tackle is the area of bullying. There are a lot of anti-bullying programs out there, but sadly, the research suggests that they're not very effective. And if you think about why they're not that effective, think about who the anti-bullying programs always target. They always target the bully, right? The perpetrator. And the goal typically of an anti-bullying program is to get kids to stop bullying, right? To eradicate bullying. And that's a wonderful goal, but I'm not sure it's always going to be feasible, right? We got to come at this at different angles, in my opinion. And so I think we also need to prepare our young people for how to handle bullying. That's not happening in these anti-bullying programs. A lot of people have asked me too, why I think that is. Like, why aren't they targeting the victim and giving them tools. And I think that it's probably that we don't want to give kids the impression that they're doing something wrong. So if we tell them to do something different, it's like there's a message that they're doing something wrong. But meanwhile, all these kids are being bullied, and they don't have these simple strategies like just simply saying whatever, or am I supposed to care? Is that supposed to be funny? It's like the easiest skill we teach in peers and works faster than any other skill. And you don't need to be neurodivergent to benefit from learning that skill. I think every kid across the globe should learn to use those strategies. So that has to be part of an anti-bullying program. But also, I think that bullying often comes to this lack of empathy. And there's this double empathy problem, particularly in autism, that we hear a lot about. And so, in future work in this area, my hope is to combine both strategies for those who are victims or potential victims of bullying and how to minimize or stop that bullying using some of these, known effective strategies, and also trying to minimize some of that bullying by really working on empathy and being more neuro-inclusive and welcoming to differences. So I could go on, and Denise, I will try to inhibit and stop because I know we have some time constraints. But I really thank you for the question. Bullying is such a huge issue, and I think we could be doing more for our young people.
Great. No, that's really helpful and I think important. So I appreciate that. So this next question, and you've talked about this a little bit, you addressed this during your presentation. If you want to elaborate just a little bit more, can you talk more about how the peers program ensures that the strategies taught do not encourage masking or changing the natural characteristics of autistic individuals? How does it incorporate the neurodiversity paradigm to promote acceptance of autistic people's authentic ways of interacting rather than feeling the need to conform to neurotypical social norms?
Yeah. I think one thing we have to remember too is that we all sort of conform to certain social norms. So we have to normalize that too for a lot of our young people. For example, Denise is using really great Zoom etiquette right now. Okay. So, Denise might have all kinds of thoughts and things that she wants to say, or maybe I'm saying something that Denise doesn't really agree with, but she's using really good Zoom etiquette. She's giving me an opportunity to speak. She waits for this pause, then she speaks. And that's a kind of conformity in doing that, right? Rather than going with every impulse that we have. And so it's always important to normalize that. And I want to ask you, Denise, when you're using your good Zoom etiquette, do you feel like you're camouflaging or you're masking or you're not who you are, your authentic self is?
Nope. It's good Zoom etiquette.
You just sort of do it, right? However, if someone were to feel that by conforming in that way is making them feel like it's not their authentic self, then they shouldn't do that, right? And that's the choice part that we're always talking about in our program, that you choose to use these strategies or not. I teach social skills strategies for a living, and I don't always use good social skills. Like, for example, I know every step for how to resolve an argument or a disagreement, but my partner will tell you that I don't always follow those steps. Like sometimes I just don't want to. And that's my choice, but it doesn't mean that I don't feel like who I am. And when I do follow the steps, I don't feel like I'm camouflaging or masking. I'm doing that because I want to resolve the argument with my partner or whomever I'm talking to. But it's a choice. And so, we start talking about those choices from the moment we start screening someone for our program. Do they want to be here? Do they know what this program is about? And is that of interest to them? Or at least are they open to learning the skills? We would never want to force these skills onto someone who doesn't want to learn them. And then even when they do want to learn them, if they choose not to use them, that's okay too. I don't use good social skills all the time, or whatever someone wants to call, good social skills. It's just a choice, basically. And so that's sort of how we think about being, more neuro-affirming. There's differences. We all have different ways of interacting with one another. And these are choices that we, choose to behave one way or another. And that can change from moment to moment and person to person. And we need to be accepting of that. Another part of that too, just before I kind of wrap up that my response, is that part of being neuro-inclusive and living in a neuro-inclusive environment, I think, is also learning to talk about neurodiversity and differences. And so one of the things that we are doing more in our program, something that started really with Peers for Careers, is learning to talk about differences and talking about diagnoses if we choose to, and how to do that. And this might be a good way to wrap up this talk, because in this Q&A, because it's very positive and affirming. And so a lot of times when people share a diagnosis, they'll just sort of come out and say, I'm autistic, or I have ADHD, or I'm neurodivergent, and they'll sort of label themselves and maybe not really share what that means for them. And that can be confusing to other people about how to receive that and what that means and how that's going to affect, our interactions. And so instead, what we do in Peers is we teach them how to share differences if they choose to, in a way it's much more positive, and also really leaves the person with a better understanding of who we are. So it usually involves identifying some type of difference that someone might have noticed. Like, maybe I'm not really that comfortable making eye contact, and maybe the other person, that I've been talking to, maybe they've noticed that. And so I might point that out. And I might say, hey, you might have noticed, but I don't make a lot of eye contact. And then this is where I can sort of decide how I want to label that or describe that. You could say that I'm neurodivergent, or I could say I'm autistic, but that's not going to be enough, because that doesn't really tell that person much. So then from there, after you kind of highlighted or sort of define the difference, you have to actually say what that means for you. And so for me, that might mean that while I don't really feel comfortable making a lot of eye contact, people will sometimes mistakenly think that I'm not listening. So that's sort of explaining how that impacts my relationships with others. But in reality, I'm actually hyper-focused on what you're saying. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, as my steps that I'm following, take that difference and turn it into a strength. If you only remember one thing from what I'm saying right now about how disclosing a difference or a diagnosis is, find the strengths. There's always strengths in neurodiversity, and I don't think we focus on them enough. In fact, those strengths are often our superpower. And so in this case, with the eye contact and people think I'm not paying attention, I'm actually hyper-focused on what you're saying. And because of my autism, I actually have a really good memory. And so I often remember a lot of what people tell me. So that's finding the strength. And then the last part of this, which is also beautiful, and it kind of wraps things up with a nice little bow, is I'm going to take that strength and I'm going to make it an asset for this relationship. Whether it's a friendship, whether it's a job, whatever it might be, a romantic relationship, I'm going to make that strength an asset. And so I think, having a good memory, remembering what our friends tell us, that's actually makes me a better friend, and I think is a good quality in a friendship. And that's how we share differences. And that's how we can, I think, actually advance a more neuro-inclusive world. People have to understand our differences and learn to appreciate them, because there's a lot to appreciate about neurodiversity. And I think that we just need to find ways to help people see that and celebrate that. And we need to celebrate that as well. So that's what I have to say about that. Thank
All
you.
right, great. Well, that is a great way to end, and we are out of time. There were many, many more questions, so we'd love to have you back, of course, at some point. It's just a lot of work that you've put out, and all of your colleagues there at UCLA. And so for everybody who's still here, we do have our webinars are starting back up. This is our kickoff of the post-summer, so be sure to check out autism.org and look up the upcoming talks. There's a lot more information coming up. And Dr. Lageson, thanks again, and we will see you again in the future.
Thank you so much, Denise.